The sun was slowly dipping behind the Atlanta skyline, leaving behind streaks of orange and gold that painted the evening sky. The streets buzzed with life, cars honking, people chatting on sidewalks, and the rhythmic hum of the city settling into its nighttime routine. Among the many vehicles on the road was a black sedan, sleek and polished, driven by Dr. Simone Harris. At 38, Simone carried herself with calm confidence. She had spent the entire day in court, representing the federal government in a high-profile case, and was finally heading home after what felt like the longest day of the month. The soft hum of her favorite jazz playlist filled the car as she drove, trying to leave the stress of her workday behind. The courtroom arguments, the legal debates, the constant pressure, it was all finally over, at least for the day. All she wanted now was a quiet evening, maybe a cup of tea, and a call to her mom to catch up. But as fate would have it, that peaceful plan was about to be interrupted. Up ahead, near the corner of Peachtree Street, a police SUV sat idling in a side lane. Inside was Captain Ronald Myers, a 52-year-old veteran of the Atlanta Police Department. Myers had been on the force for nearly 3 decades. To his colleagues, he was known for his no-nonsense attitude and strict approach to enforcing the law. But to those who had encountered him on the streets, he was often remembered for something else: his impatience and his quick temper when dealing with drivers he suspected of wrongdoing. As Simone's sedan passed the intersection, Myers' attention snapped toward her car. He noticed her make a slightly sharp turn, perfectly legal, but enough to catch his eye. He narrowed his gaze, his instincts kicking in, and reached for the patrol lights. With a flick of a switch, the SUV's red and blue lights started flashing, and the siren let out a short burst. The air around Simone felt heavier now. The evening hum of the city was still there, the distant chatter, the faint sound of traffic, but where she stood, time seemed to slow. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off nearby shop windows, painting patterns on the pavement beneath her feet. The following morning, Atlanta woke up to a story no one had expected. While Simone was sipping her first cup of tea in her quiet apartment, the world outside was buzzing. She had no idea yet that the small crowd of bystanders from the night before had captured the entire roadside encounter on their phones. The next morning, the city of Atlanta woke up to more headlines, and this time, the story had grown even bigger. What had started as a simple traffic stop had now turned into one of the most talked about events in the city. Local newspapers carried bold titles on their front pages, and national media outlets had begun covering the story as well. For Simone, it felt surreal. She was sitting at her kitchen table, holding a warm cup of coffee, scrolling through news articles on her tablet. Her name appeared in almost every headline, but it wasn't the attention she cared about, it was the message behind the story that mattered to her. The video of the encounter had crossed over 2 million views overnight. It wasn't just Atlanta talking about it anymore, people from across the country were sharing their thoughts. Most praised Simone for her patience and professionalism. Others admired how she calmly stood her ground without raising her voice or losing control. A few comments especially touched her heart: she proved that confidence doesn't need to be loud. This is how authority and respect should work together. A true example of handling tense situations with grace. Simone smiled faintly as she read them, though deep inside, she knew there was still work to be done. While she appreciated the support, she also understood that this moment was bigger than just her. Around mid-morning, she received a call from her supervisor, U.S. Attorney Laura Jenkins. "Simone," Laura said warmly, "I know this has been overwhelming, but the Department of Justice wants to commend you publicly." Simone hesitated. "Commend me? For what?" "For the way you handled yourself," Laura explained. "This incident has started an important conversation about cooperation between local police and federal authorities. They believe your response set a positive example." Simone thought about it for a moment before replying softly, "I didn't do anything extraordinary, Laura. I just stayed calm." "And sometimes," Laura said with a gentle laugh, That's extraordinary enough. Later that day, Simone was invited to a special meeting at the federal courthouse. When she walked into the conference room, several officials from both federal and local law enforcement were present, including Atlanta's Police Chief Harold Thompson and his deputy. To Simone's slight surprise, Captain Ronald Myers was also there. For a brief moment, Simone and Myers exchanged glances. His expression was serious but respectful, and she offered a polite nod, which he returned quietly. Chief Thompson began the meeting by addressing the group. "We've all seen what happened," he said. "The video is everywhere. While the situation didn't escalate, it highlighted something important: we need better understanding between our departments and better communication with the public." He paused, then turned slightly toward Simone. "Miss Harris, you showed professionalism and composure. That's the kind of behavior we want to encourage on both sides." Simone listened carefully, then spoke softly when it was her turn. "Thank you, Chief. I believe last night showed us something important: misunderstandings can happen even when both sides are trying to do their jobs. But if we approach these situations with respect and patience, they don't have to escalate." The room was quiet for a moment as her words sank in. Even Captain Myers, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat and spoke. "I want to say," he began slowly, "that I appreciate how Miss Harris handled the situation. I didn't know her position at first, but even after I did, she remained respectful the entire time. That says a lot." It wasn't easy for him to speak publicly, but his sincerity was clear. Simone gave him a small, polite smile in response. The meeting concluded with an agreement to begin joint training programs between local police officers and federal prosecutors. The goal was to improve cooperation, reduce miscommunication, and ensure smoother interactions moving forward. Over the next few weeks, Simone's life changed in unexpected ways. She continued her work at the courthouse, but she also became a part of several community forums, speaking about law enforcement transparency, citizens' rights, and the importance of respectful communication. At one such forum, a young law student approached her nervously. "Miss Harris," the student said shyly, "I watched the video, and I just wanted to say, you inspired me. You showed me what it means to stay calm under pressure." Simone smiled warmly and replied, "Thank you. Remember, it's not about who speaks the loudest. It's about who listens the most." Her words resonated with many people, and soon, her story became an example used in workshops and training sessions for both attorneys and law enforcement officers across the state. Meanwhile, at the Atlanta Police Department, changes were happening too. The department introduced new training programs focused on communication skills, cultural sensitivity, and understanding federal procedures. These sessions used real-life case studies including Simone's incident to teach officers how to handle situations with more care and patience. Captain Myers attended every single session personally. For him, the incident had been a turning point. He had spent years in the field, confident in his methods, but seeing how quickly public perception could shift made him rethink his approach. One afternoon, after a training session, Myers approached Simone quietly. "Miss Harris," he said, his tone softer than before, "I wanted to thank you." Simone turned to him, slightly surprised. "For what?" "For handling that night with patience," he said sincerely. "I've been on the job a long time, but I've learned more from this incident than I expected. I'm making changes for myself and for my team." Simone smiled kindly. "That means a lot, Captain. Growth is never easy, but it's always worth it." The two shook hands, a quiet sign of mutual respect, something neither of them had anticipated when they first crossed paths on that tense evening. Months later, Simone was invited to speak at a regional law enforcement summit. She stood before an audience of officers, attorneys, and community leaders, sharing her experience openly. "In every encounter," she said, her voice steady and confident, "we have a choice. We can approach with frustration and fear, or we can approach with respect and understanding. That choice can change everything, not just for us, but for the communities we serve. The room erupted in applause, not because of her title or authority, but because her message resonated with everyone present. Back in her office later that evening, Simone sat by the window overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the Atlanta skyline. She reflected on how much had changed since that night for her, for Myers, and perhaps even for the city itself. What began as a routine stop had turned into a moment of transformation. It sparked conversations, inspired reforms, and built bridges where there had once been walls. Simone realized something powerful: true change doesn't always come from dramatic actions. Sometimes, it begins with a calm voice, a respectful tone, and the courage to stand steady when the world feels unsteady. As the lights of the city began to twinkle below, she smiled softly to herself. That night had changed her life. But more importantly, it had reminded her and everyone watching of something timeless. One of those videos had already made its way onto social media overnight, and by sunrise, it was spreading rapidly. The clip was short, less than 2 minutes long, but it was enough to capture the tension, the flashing lights, and Simone's calm yet confident voice as she explained her role as an assistant U.S. attorney. By 9 a.m., thousands of people had seen it. By noon, it had crossed 500,000 views. Meanwhile, Simone was preparing for another day at the federal courthouse, unaware of the storm brewing online. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but she ignored them at first, assuming they were just work emails. It wasn't until her colleague, Marcus, called her directly that she learned what had happened. "Simone, you need to check the news," Marcus said, his voice urgent but steady. "The news?" she asked, confused. "What happened?" "There's a video of you," he replied. "Last night's traffic stop. It's everywhere." Simone paused, the cup of tea still in her hand. "Everywhere?" "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "It's all over social media, and now local news channels are picking it up. People are talking about how calmly you handled the situation. You should see the comments, everyone's praising you." For a moment, Simone just stood there in silence, processing his words. She hadn't expected this. Last night had felt like a simple misunderstanding, nothing more. But now, it seemed the entire city was watching. She opened her laptop and searched for the video. Within seconds, she found it: grainy footage recorded from a distance, but clear enough to see her standing by her car, speaking to Captain Myers with steady composure. The video showed Myers asking her questions, her polite responses, and finally, the moment she revealed her federal credentials. There was no shouting, no harsh words, just quiet authority and calm restraint. Beneath the video were thousands of comments: "This woman handled it like a true professional. The officer didn't even realize who she was. Incredible. Shows the importance of staying calm and knowing your rights." Simone closed the laptop gently, taking a deep breath. She wasn't angry or upset, just surprised at how quickly a private moment had turned public. By mid-afternoon, the story had already reached major news outlets. Reporters were framing it as an example of how professionalism and patience can de-escalate tense encounters. Some focused on Simone's role as a federal attorney, while others discussed the importance of better communication between local and federal law enforcement. Meanwhile, back at the Atlanta Police Department, things were very different. Captain Ronald Myers sat in his office, scrolling through headlines on his phone. He hadn't expected last night's stop to draw any attention, but now his name was everywhere. While the video didn't show anything inappropriate, the department had launched an internal review to understand why Simone had been stopped twice in the same night. A soft knock came at his door. It was Deputy Chief Harold Thompson, Myers' direct supervisor. "Ron," Thompson said calmly, stepping into the room. "We need to talk." Myers stood up immediately, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "I know why you're here," he said. Thompson placed a file on the desk and folded his arms. "This isn't about accusations," he said evenly. "It's about perception. The public is watching this closely. The department wants answers." Myers nodded slowly. "I didn't mistreat her," he explained. "It was a routine stop. I didn't know who she was until later." "I know," Thompson replied. "But the question isn't just about last night, it's about how we handle high-profile encounters. The city expects professionalism, especially when federal officers are involved." Myers sighed, leaning against his desk. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. For years, he had done his job quietly, rarely drawing notice. But now, every decision he made was under a microscope. Meanwhile, at the federal courthouse, Simone was called into a meeting with U.S. Attorney Laura Jenkins, her direct supervisor. "Simone," Laura said warmly, motioning for her to sit, "I saw the video." Simone smiled faintly. "I guess the whole city has." Laura leaned forward, resting her hands on the desk. "I just want you to know how proud I am of the way you handled yourself. You stayed calm, you stayed respectful, and you represented this office beautifully." "Thank you," Simone replied softly. "Honestly, I wasn't expecting any of this. I just wanted to get home last night." Laura nodded sympathetically. "I know. But now that it's public, there may be follow-up questions. Reporters might reach out. You don't have to respond to any of them. Our communications team will handle statements." Simone appreciated the support. She didn't want to be in the spotlight, but she understood that sometimes, moments like this carried lessons for the wider community. By evening, local news stations were airing segments about the incident. They showed the video alongside commentary from legal experts, police representatives, and community leaders. Some praised Simone's composure, while others discussed the need for stronger collaboration between local police and federal authorities. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had even gathered, holding signs that read, "Respect. Professionalism. Justice." Simone watched from her office window, humbled by the unexpected attention. She hadn't asked for any of this, but she hoped something positive could come from it, perhaps better understanding, better training, and better trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. Later that night, as she drove home, she noticed how different the city felt. Street lights glimmered against the pavement, and the quiet hum of traffic filled the air, but there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. It was as though people were more aware now, more thoughtful, more attentive. She pulled into her driveway and parked the car, taking a deep breath before stepping inside her home. Her phone was still buzzing with messages, emails, and missed calls, but she set it aside for the night. She needed quiet. Across town, however, Captain Myers wasn't resting as easily. At the precinct, reporters had begun calling for interviews, and the department's leadership had scheduled an official briefing for the following day. Myers knew he'd have to answer questions not just about the stop itself, but about how the situation had been handled and why. Sitting at his desk, he reflected on the events of the previous night. Simone's calm voice, her polite words, and the way she'd carried herself replayed in his mind. He realized now how quickly situations could escalate if handled poorly, and how different things might have been if she hadn't maintained her composure. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning not his authority, but his approach. By the time the city lights dimmed and most of Atlanta settled into sleep, one thing was clear: the simple traffic stop had grown into something larger than anyone expected. This was no longer just about one night, one car, or one conversation. It was about respect, communication, and the power of staying calm when the world is watching. And for both Simone and Myers, life was about to change in ways neither of them could have imagined. Captain Ronald Myers circled her car slowly, his boots tapping softly. A Simone sedan moved smoothly down the road, but her thoughts lingered on the encounter she had just left behind. The flashing lights, the questions, the tension, it all replayed in her mind like a scene she couldn't quite shake off. She told herself it was over, yet somewhere deep inside, she sensed the night wasn't finished testing her patience. Just a few blocks away, at another intersection, traffic slowed unexpectedly. Cars were lined up, their brake lights glowing red, and Simone gently pressed her foot on the brake pedal. As she came to a stop, she noticed something unusual in her rearview mirror. The same police SUV she had just left behind was there again. Her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. "Still behind me," she whispered softly to herself. She thought it was just coincidence at first. After all, this was a busy road, police vehicles were everywhere in the city. But as she continued forward, turning onto another street, the SUV followed each turn. A faint sigh escaped her lips, but she stayed calm. Finally, at the next signal, the patrol lights flashed once again. Simone's heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but out of confusion. She signaled properly and pulled her car to the side once more. The street around her was quiet, but a few people walking by began to notice what was happening. Some slowed their pace, curious to see why the same car was being stopped again within minutes. She lowered her window calmly as Captain Myers approached once more, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, his tone steady, "I need to ask you to step out of the vehicle again." Simone looked at him carefully, her voice composed. "Officer, I just want to understand. Is there an issue with my vehicle or my documents?" Myers paused briefly, then replied, "I need to clarify some details, that's all. Please step out." She nodded silently, choosing not to argue. Opening her door, she stepped out onto the pavement again, her posture straight and graceful. Years of courtroom experience had taught her one valuable skill above all else: the power of composure. "Officer," she began gently, "I've already provided my license and registration, and you confirmed everything was fine. May I ask what additional information you need?" Myers hesitated, glancing at her, then back at his patrol vehicle. "Just routine follow-up," he said briefly, avoiding specifics. By now, two pedestrians had stopped nearby, watching quietly. One of them held up a phone, appearing to record the interaction. Simone noticed but didn't react, keeping her focus entirely on Myers. She took a small step forward, her voice calm and steady, but her words carefully chosen. "Captain Myers," she said, using the rank displayed on his badge, "I appreciate that you're doing your job, but I also need to let you know something important." He folded his arms, curious. "Go on." "I work for the United States Department of Justice," Simone said softly, her tone polite but firm. "I'm an assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. That means I represent the federal government in legal matters." There was a brief silence. Myers blinked, processing her words carefully. "I understand," he said slowly, though his expression showed uncertainty. "But that doesn't change how I handle traffic stops." Simone offered a polite smile, her tone measured. "Of course, officer. I respect that you're following procedure. But I believe it's important for you to understand the role I hold. My position grants me certain legal responsibilities and, in certain matters, legal authority beyond local jurisdiction." This time, Myers' gaze sharpened slightly. "And what exactly are you implying, ma'am?" "I'm not implying anything," Simone replied smoothly, her voice calm yet steady. "I'm simply clarifying that I operate under federal law. I respect your role as a local law enforcement officer, but I'd like us both to handle this situation carefully, given the circumstances." The pedestrians nearby exchanged glances, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The tension between them wasn't confrontational, but it carried weight like two professionals navigating an unexpected overlap of authority. Meyer's radio buzzed faintly on his shoulder, breaking the silence. He reached for it, listened briefly, then responded in short, clipped phrases. Simone waited patiently, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, never once raising her voice or showing frustration. When he finished, Myers turned back toward her, his expression more thoughtful than before. "Miss Harris," he said carefully, "I need to verify your credentials." "Of course," Simone replied, nodding calmly. She reached into her bag and retrieved a small identification card, her official Department of Justice badge. She handed it to him respectfully. Myers took it, examining it closely under the glow of the streetlight. His posture shifted subtly, and his voice, though still formal, had softened slightly. "This checks out," he admitted after a moment. Simone gave a slight nod. "Thank you." By now, a small group had gathered on the sidewalk, keeping their distance but observing quietly. A few whispered to each other, wondering who Simone was and why the exchange seemed so serious. Myers glanced at them briefly, then back at Simone. His voice lowered slightly, almost thoughtful now. "You could have mentioned this earlier," he said. "I prefer not to," Simone replied gently. "Titles don't define respect, officer. I believe every citizen deserves to be treated with courtesy, regardless of their position." Her words seemed to land. For the first time since their interaction began, something shifted in Myers' expression, a flicker of reflection, perhaps even understanding. There was a long pause, and then he handed her badge back carefully. "I appreciate you showing me this," he said in a quieter tone. Simone accepted it, slipping it back into her bag. "I understand the challenges of your job," she said sincerely. "We both work in law enforcement, just at different levels. I believe we're both here to serve and protect. The difference is only in jurisdiction." Myers nodded slowly, his gaze steady now but no longer as rigid as before. "You're right," he said simply. "We are." The energy around them felt lighter suddenly, though the crowd remained curious. One of the onlookers whispered, "She's federal," and the words seemed to ripple softly through the group. Myers noticed the growing attention and straightened his posture. "All right," he said finally, his tone returning to its professional steadiness. "You're free to go, Miss Harris. Drive safely." "Thank you, Captain," Simone replied warmly. "And thank you for your service." She returned to her car, closing the door gently and starting the engine. Before pulling away, she glanced once more in the rearview mirror. Myers was still standing there, watching her car, his expression unreadable but thoughtful. As she drove off, the city lights reflected on her windshield, and her mind replayed the exchange in quiet fragments. She hadn't raised her voice once, hadn't shown frustration, yet the entire situation had transformed the moment she calmly revealed the truth. Inside, she felt a quiet pride, not in her position or authority, but in her ability to remain composed and respectful under pressure. Years of courtroom discipline had shaped her, but tonight had reminded her of something else. Sometimes, dignity itself carried more power than titles ever could. She didn't know yet that videos of the encounter were already making their way online. Bystanders had captured snippets: her calm demeanor, the quiet tension, the unexpected revelation of her role. Within hours, those clips would circulate far beyond this quiet Atlanta street. For now, though, Simone focused on the road ahead, unaware of just how much her life and Captain Myers was about to change. The ground. His sharp gaze scanned every detail: the license plate, the tires, the back seat through the glass. To anyone watching, it looked like a thorough inspection, but to Simone, it felt like something more. She stood tall, hands folded neatly in front of her, her posture calm but firm. Years in the courtroom had taught her how to maintain composure, even when situations turned unpredictable. Still, she couldn't ignore the quiet unease forming in her chest. "Ma'am," Myers said finally, stopping by her passenger door. Where exactly were you headed when I stopped you? I'm heading home, Simone replied gently. I live near Midtown. And you said you work at the federal courthouse. Yes, she confirmed. Assistant U.S. Attorney, Northern District of Georgia. There was another pause, just long enough to feel noticeable. Myers gave a short nod but didn't say much in response. Simone watched his expression carefully, hoping the mention of her position might ease the situation, but it seemed to have little effect. His posture remained stiff, and his tone stayed firm, measured but cautious. I see, he said after a moment. And you said you were coming from work? Yes, from a court session, Simone replied. It's been a long day. Myers glanced briefly at her car again, then met her eyes. Do you know why I stopped you? Simone hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I assumed it might have been for a traffic-related reason, but I'm not entirely sure. You made a sharp turn back there, he explained. Could have been unsafe if someone was crossing the street. Simone nodded politely. I understand, officer. I was careful, but I appreciate your concern. Something about her composed response seemed to catch Myers slightly off guard, though he didn't show it openly. He turned away for a moment, glancing at his SUV, where his radio emitted soft static sounds from other ongoing calls. By now, a few pedestrians had gathered at a distance, keeping an eye on what was happening. A couple of them had their phones out, recording quietly. Simone noticed them but didn't react. She kept her attention focused on Myers, knowing that staying respectful and calm was the best way forward. He returned to her, holding her license and registration in his hand. Everything came back clear, he said, his tone neutral. No previous issues on your record. That's correct, Simone replied softly. Myers adjusted his posture slightly, studying her carefully. What kind of work do you handle as an attorney? He asked. I represent the federal government in legal matters, Simone explained, her voice steady. Mostly cases involving compliance, financial crimes, and policy enforcement. He gave a small nod, letting the information sink in. There was a brief silence, broken only by the distant honking of cars passing behind them. All right, he said finally, I just wanted to make sure everything checked out. You're free to go in a moment, but I need to finish logging this stop. Simone remained patient, quietly nodding as he returned to his SUV to make notes in his report. While he was occupied, she allowed herself a slow, steady breath. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, but she didn't relax completely, not yet. From where she stood, she could hear small fragments of conversation from the onlookers nearby. Why'd they stop her? Someone whispered. No idea, another voice replied softly. She looks calm though. Simone glanced at them briefly, then shifted her gaze back to Myers, who was still seated inside his SUV, speaking into his radio. She wondered briefly why the stop was taking so long, but she didn't ask. Years of experience taught her one thing clearly: sometimes, silence was the most powerful response. Finally, Myers stepped out of the SUV again and approached her slowly. His expression was still serious, but there was something different in his eyes now: curiosity, perhaps, or hesitation. Miss Harris, he said, handing back her documents, you're clear to leave. Thank you, officer, Simone replied, taking her license and registration back carefully. But instead of walking away immediately, Myers lingered for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said, his voice slightly less rigid than before. Of course, Simone replied. You've worked in federal law for a while, right? Yes, she said. Almost 12 years now. He seemed to process that, his gaze thoughtful. Must be a challenging job. Simone smiled faintly. It has its moments. There was a brief, quiet pause between them, and for the first time since the stop began, the tension seemed to ease slightly. As Simone prepared to return to her car, Myers shifted slightly and spoke again, his tone cautious but not unkind. "You said earlier you made a legal right turn. Just, be careful in this area. Traffic gets unpredictable here, and we've had a few accidents recently." Simone nodded, appreciating the advice. "I understand, officer. Thank you." She opened her car door and slid back into the driver's seat, placing her hands on the steering wheel. The familiar comfort of the leather under her fingers grounded her as she prepared to pull away. But just as she started the engine, she noticed something unexpected. Myers was still standing near her car, watching thoughtfully, almost as though he was trying to decide whether to say something else. Simone lowered her window halfway. "Is there anything else, officer?" she asked gently. He shook his head slowly, almost as if debating with himself, before replying. "No. Drive safe, Miss Harris." She offered him a polite smile. "Thank you. Have a good evening." With that, she pulled back onto the road, leaving the flashing lights behind her. The night felt quieter now, though her thoughts were far from settled. As she drove, she couldn't shake the sense that something about the encounter had been unusual. She'd been stopped before. It wasn't uncommon in a city like Atlanta, but this felt different somehow. The careful way Myers had studied her, the length of the stop, the shift in his tone when he learned about her position, it all lingered in her mind. Simone turned down the volume on her music and drove in silence for a while, lost in thought. She knew her job came with challenges, and sometimes those challenges followed her even outside the courthouse walls. What she didn't know yet was that this quiet, tense moment on the roadside was only the beginning of a series of events that would soon spiral into something far bigger than she imagined. Somewhere behind her, the red and blue lights faded into the distance, but the night was far from over. Inside the sedan, Simone glanced in her rearview mirror and saw the lights. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly in confusion. "Strange," she murmured to herself, easing her foot off the gas. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't broken any traffic laws, and was positive her car registration and insurance were up to date. Still, she carefully signaled and pulled her vehicle over to the side of the road. The evening air outside was warm and humid as Simone lowered her driver's side window. She took a deep breath, calming herself as the officer approached. Over the years, Simone had developed a habit whenever interacting with law enforcement: stay polite, stay composed, and keep your hands where they could be seen. Captain Myers stepped out of his SUV, straightening his uniform as he approached the car. His boots made a dull sound against the pavement with each step. When he reached Simone's window, he leaned slightly forward, glancing into the vehicle. "Evening, ma'am," he said curtly, his tone clipped and formal. "License and registration." Simone offered a polite smile. "Good evening, officer. May I ask what seems to be the issue?" Myers kept his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. "We'll get to that. License and registration, please." Simone nodded, reaching calmly into her handbag to retrieve her driver's license and the small folder where she kept her car documents neatly organized. She handed them over without hesitation. As Myers glanced at her information, Simone tried to ease the tension with casual conversation. "Was I going a little too fast? I didn't realize if I missed a sign somewhere." But Myers didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes scanned her license for a moment longer before finally meeting her gaze again. "We'll discuss that in a minute," he said, his voice still firm. Simone sat back in her seat, her hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. She noticed how quiet the street had suddenly become. A few pedestrians nearby had slowed their pace, glancing curiously at the flashing patrol lights. Inside, she reminded herself to remain patient. Encounters like these could be unpredictable, and even though she knew she had done nothing wrong, she also understood the importance of staying respectful and measured. Captain Myers walked back to his SUV for a brief moment, running Simone's information through the system. Everything came back perfectly clear: no tickets, no prior incidents, nothing to suggest any wrongdoing. Still, when he returned to the car, his demeanor hadn't softened. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," he said firmly. Simone blinked in surprise. "Step out? May I ask why, officer?" Her voice remained calm, but there was a hint of confusion in her tone. Myers crossed his arms, his posture steady. "I observed what looked like reckless driving back there. I need to make sure everything checks out." Simone paused for a moment, considering her response carefully. "I understand, officer," she said finally, unbuckling her seat belt. "Just to clarify, though, I made a legal right turn. I can assure you I wasn't speeding or violating any traffic laws." Myers' expression didn't change. "Ma'am, I'm not here to debate. Please step out of the car." She nodded slowly, choosing not to argue further. With deliberate calm, Simone opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. The warm air clung to her skin, and she could feel the weight of a few curious eyes from passers-by who had stopped to watch. Standing beside her car, Simone adjusted her blazer and faced Myers, maintaining her composure. "Is there anything specific you'd like me to do, officer?" she asked politely. Myers studied her for a moment, as if trying to read her. "I just want to confirm you're okay to drive," he said. "Mind if I ask where you're headed tonight?" "Home," Simone replied simply. "I'm coming from the federal courthouse downtown. Long day at work." Something flickered in Myers' expression at the mention of the courthouse, but he didn't comment on it. Instead, he glanced briefly at her sedan, then back at her. "Courthouse, huh? You an attorney?" he asked, his tone somewhere between curiosity and skepticism. "Yes," Simone said with a polite nod. "Assistant U.S. Attorney, Northern District of Georgia." There was a brief silence after she spoke, almost as if the air between them shifted slightly. Myers' expression remained neutral, but he gave a small nod before stepping back. "Well," he said after a moment, "let's make sure everything checks out, then you'll be on your way." Simone nodded once more, staying patient as Myers moved toward the front of her vehicle to inspect her headlights and license plate. From where she stood, Simone could hear snippets of conversation from a small group of pedestrians nearby. They whispered among themselves, wondering what was happening. She ignored them, focusing instead on keeping her breathing steady. Inside, she couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about Myers' approach felt heavier than a standard traffic stop. But rather than jump to conclusions, she chose to let the situation play out. After years of working in law, she understood better than most how important it was to stay calm under pressure. As the minutes stretched on, the flashing lights from the police SUV continued to draw attention, and Simone quietly hoped this encounter would end soon. She had no idea then that this was only the beginning of a night she would never forget.